to City Scene. This is downtown Phoenix, where you already know there's a ton of things to do, places to see and museums to visit. Hi everybody, I'm Janine LaCure. Today we're going to take you to some places I bet you didn't even know existed. One of them is called the Hall of Flame. It's a firefighting museum. It's a little bit east of downtown Phoenix. The other one, right here, right smack downtown, the Phoenix Police Museum. Did you even know we had one? Let's go inside and take a look. I'd like you all to meet Mike Nicolin.
Well, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Mike. You were with the Phoenix Police Department for a long time.
Yes.
And now you're running the museum here.
I am, and it's a real joy. I'm very fortunate. I was on the police department back in 1966 and retired in 98, and now I'm working part-time here at the museum.
Now, how did the museum come to be?
Well, back in 1992, Bob Demlong, who's still on the police department, and I put together some artifacts and museum material and just started from there with photographs, and we developed what we have today.
This is a special interest for you, it sounds like. You've been paying attention to this for a long time.
It is, very much so. My heart's right here.
Let's walk through the museum, and let's start with this map right here. Tell me what we're looking at.
Okay, this is a map dated back in, it's a blow-up of a copy in 1885. And it gives you an idea of the city streets. Obviously, they're dirt, and then the canal works that are going on there. The different streets you can see are still the same names, Jefferson and Washington.
So this is downtown Phoenix.
It's downtown Phoenix, correct.
And we're looking at just a few square blocks of what we know now.
Very small, very small.
Well, and you were talking about the canals. One of the things I noticed in the upper left there is a picture of the falls of the Arizona Canal. I never knew that.
Oh, yes.
That there was a waterfall.
A lot of water. We were very fortunate in moving here years ago. Obviously, the Indians, the Hohokam Indian Reservation was on Phoenix before we took it over, and they left a lot of their canal work. The result of that, we used that canal work to feed us, actually, you know, with corn and wheat and things like that, our agriculture.
The farming that we needed.
Yeah.
So the police force was a real important part of the city in those days.
Oh, yes. Well, it played one part of it in city government. All of the city government people were pretty much family. And one of the family members was Henry Garfious, who was our Phoenix Marshal back in the 1800s, first one.
This is the kind of thing that they actually would have worn.
Yes, they would have. They wanted to give the appearance of being proper and dressed really nice and not a, you know, just a town of
we're not a podunk town out here.
Yeah, you know, where there's problems and you'd be afraid to come to Phoenix. We wanted not to give that impression, so.
So we dressed up a little bit.
Dressed up.
Even though it would have been pretty darn hot.
Well, actually, because of irrigation and because of the dirt, we didn't have the asphalt, we didn't have the concrete, so the levels of heat aren't, or they weren't what they are today.
So warm but not as bad.
Yeah, it really wasn't that bad.
Now, when somebody got in trouble in Phoenix, they might very well end up listed right here.
Oh, yes. That's an interesting book. That kind of describes every individual that was arrested back in 1895. This document is original, and the term booking that you hear so often in the past is really when their name goes into the book. That is when they've been booked.
That's where that actually comes from.
Correct.
Now, in this book, we see the date. We also see who got arrested, right?
Correct.
What they got in trouble for.
Yes.
Which in this case is drunk and disorderly.
Had a lot of that.
And what, as we go across the line here, what else does it tell us?
You have the arresting officer.
Which looks like a guy named Bailey on this
And
one.
then the property that they had on him at the time of their arrest.
Okay, so
and
this
then
guy had some valise and tools with him.
Correct. And then it would go over to when they were released, what time they served in the jail. And
so here's somebody who was fined $4.
Yes.
And released on July 11th of 1895, more than 100 years ago.
I think they would like to pay as opposed to being in jail, because this is the jail.
This is the jail. Tell me about the jail.
Well, the jail is just a cement slab behind a building in an open area, and it had a chain off of it, and the blacksmith would hook you to that, and that's where you spent your time. And there was no shade. You'd probably get water out there.
No facilities?
None.
So if you were sentenced to 4 days in jail, you literally spent 4 days chained to the street.
That's correct.
Changes your whole outlook, doesn't it?
Yes, we didn't have very many.
Now, when a police officer had something going on and needed to contact fellow officers, how did that work back in those days?
Well, our communication systems, let's go and I'll show you how
Okay,
that
great.
works. This is one of our communication systems, and this is what we call a call box. And the call box, we had 3 of them in the city of Phoenix, and it's a telegraph system. It's before telephones.
Okay.
And the material that we use, instead of plastic, as you see today, or years ago with the phones, they use Bakelite. And the system is, again, on a telegraph system.
Okay.
And it allows you to direct call to the police building, or for a wagon, meaning someone to transport the prisoner that you have. But the city was so small,
you could kind of walk him over to the jail,
so
right?
you're probably right across the street.
But they could call for help. They could make a report if they
Exactly,
needed to.
exactly.
Now, does this still work?
No, it's been disconnected.
It had its days,
yeah, it's now been retired,
Yeah.
like me.
Yeah,
And that's not a bad thing.
That's not a bad thing at all. Now, there's more history around the corner.
Yes,
I
we'll go
understand.
right on
All
the corner.
Let's go take a look. Now, Mike, this is pretty nifty, but I got to ask you, this is a police museum. What are you doing with a fire plug in here?
Exactly. Well, I think if the fire department knew I had this,
They'd come get you.
they'd come and get me at night. This is an 1884 fire plug, and we got it from our police range. You weren't able to identify it really much of anything at the time that was at the range because it had so many coats of paint on it. But it was, when we worked at it, we came up with this.
And it actually says
obviously.
1884 over here.
Correct.
Now, what was it doing at the range? What were you
Well,
guys
we
doing?
used this along with other objects, things that you would find in the city street, to help the officer get behind. If there was someone shooting at him, he knew that he could stay behind this and pretty much be protected from, incoming.
So this is, well,
Yeah.
so the fire department isn't going to begrudge you that at all, because that was good training.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Now, this vehicle, this is really something.
It really is. It's a 1919 Model T, and it would be something that the police officers would be driving during the turn of the century, the early 1900s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about the car. It's a Tin Lizzie, is that what you said?
It's called a Tin Lizzie. In fact, years ago, they used to have pictures of these cars and what used to be called the Keystone Cops.
Oh, right, from
They're
the
all
movies?
convertibles, and of course, this was during the wartime, and sheet metal was very expensive, and Henry Ford put this together as pretty much to be the only car you ever need in life. So the police department had one of these.
And this was basically your squad car. If you were going to arrest somebody and haul them to jail, you'd put them in the back here?
Probably walk them over to jail because it's
Not
real
even worth
close.
the drive. Now, when you started the museum, you decided to focus on people, and this is one of the people
Correct.
you chose.
Yes, we focus on people, individuals that were on our department years ago. An example would be this individual here, Frank Larison. He was in the Spanish-American War, so that was a little bit before my time.
Mine too. This is, it looks like a passport or something.
Yes, to get him into different places across the country, obviously, but down into Mexico, and also he was one of our first police officers on the department. And the interesting thing about him is he was a marksman, and so was his wife. They were both avid hunters, and he brought to the police department the Billy Club, and that was to help us in one more step to take before we went to deadly force. So it was a good example for what we needed.
Now, I would tend to think that's a handcuff. Is that a good guess?
That's correct. And that went around your wrist. And the handle on top turned, and as it turned, it put pressure on the bones on each side of the wrist, and obviously that was to direct your attention to following him, because a little bit of pain involved
Not
there.
exactly comfortable, yeah. Well, now, as we go around the corner here, we've got some other material. Has to do a little bit more recently in time.
Correct.
Some of the things, some of the equipment that you have used over the last, looks like 20 years or so.
Right. This is an example of the levels that we have progressed to from the early 1920s in having police vests. We had one, and it was made out of plates of metal, and of course it's very heavy.
This is a bulletproof
This is an
vest
example.
from the
Yes, this is
1920s?
it. Correct. And the picture in the background is of an individual standing there and a police officer pointing a gun at him. And I don't know if he was to shoot him or just to show that it would resist the
But
bullet.
he sure came off looking like a pretty darn brave guy, huh?
Yes, he did.
But that's from the 1920s. This is closer to what we use today.
Correct. And these are more flexible vests, things that you could wear under your shirt, lighter weight compared to the metal that we had before. The only metal part would be in the center area, and that's to protect your heart from direct impact.
Mm-hmm. Now, explain to me this windshield. It's got bullet holes in it. What were you all doing with this?
We were trying to establish a ballistic material in the plastic so that if an officer was shot and it went through the plastic, it would reduce the speed of it, if not stop it. But what we found was the material, because of the extreme heat, would crystallize and then, of course, change colors like it has. And in crystallizing, you can see that the bullets went right on through.
And what they're next to here, though, this is a piece of a vest, it looks like.
Correct.
And it actually shows how it does stop.
Correct. There's examples of 45, a 9mm, 357, and these were actual shots taken into the vest, and you could see that it did resist the impact. Although you do feel that when it hits your chest, it didn't go all the way through, and it saved the individual's
Saved people's
life.
lives. Now, as we continue on here over to the right, tell me some more about what's in.
This is J.J. McGrath. He came on the police department in 1907, and he later became the chief of detectives. And he pretty much was responsible to all the things in the police department, and the go-to guy that they would use during that time period.
And the microphone down here.
That was one of our first communication systems in headquarters.
So you actually had call letters, KGZJ. That's
Correct.
even hard to say, but that was the police department.
Yes, it was.
Mike, tell me what we've got in this case here.
Okay, this is a background on a Phoenix police officer that was on our department in the 60s, and his name is Bill Copeland, and he later became recognized as National Police Officer of the Year because of his number of arrests and organized crime.
It's quite an honor for him.
Oh, it was.
Now, is this the materials assembled by his family? How did you gather this collection?
Some of these things are, yes. We contacted the family, and they provided us with some pictures. We had some of the pictures. They provided us with his badge and his ID card, and just a little storyline on what he did as a family member. You can see in the corner there, he's with his wife and his children. And then the other picture shows the officer sitting on the table. Well, that's his brother. Both of them were police officers on the department.
Right?
Yes.
And it's interesting to see how much the shield has changed over
Yes,
the years.
yeah, there have been a lot of changes. And we have on the other side here his national recognition and his badge that he received. And the interesting thing here, as you see, is the patch. This is the shoulder patch that really hasn't changed much from the one today, except that it's lined out around the eagle, where the ones today are filled in, and there's a pocket all the way around it, so it shows a broader picture of the...
But this is still basically what our officers wear.
Yes,
Now, Mike, we were talking about the patch and the change in the badges. This is a great display that shows how much they've changed.
Correct. Early on, you can see here, probably around the turn of the century, the badges and the individuality of each one of them, and they change to where they become pretty uniform. Although the names of them on the badges were different. Some of them said patrolman, others said police women.
And in fact, we have some police women's badges, specifically different.
Yes.
And that's all changed.
It's all changed. Now, today we have police officers, and they all dress the same. They all are identified the same, except for your rank structures, which are listed here, like your lieutenant and captain. And then we have majors, assistant chiefs, and chief.
And so forth, yeah.
Correct.
Now, as we look down here, what's this? What are we doing with this?
Well, we used to manufacture our own bullets, and they were the lead-based bullets, and the whole purpose of it was to shoot off a bunch of bullets at the range so we could practice. And we didn't want to use factory loads, too cost prohibitive, so we went to the lead bullet. And these are different things that were used to manufacture the lead.
Actually, to melt it down and to press it into a bullet that you could shoot on the range.
Correct.
All right. Now, as we look over here, this is a reproduction of a postcard.
Yes, it's actually of the police building, and this exists today. It's been restored, and it's a combination. This side over here is the county complex, and that was active up through the 70s, and it's been totally restored, and they still use that for court purposes. This other side has the old City Hall building, and it was converted over to our police building at the time, up through the 60s and 70s. And the upper floors over here and here were jail cells, and they were set up for all our arrests. When we made arrests in the city of Phoenix, they went to jail. In fact, we have one of those over here.
Now, I've managed to go for a lot of years without being in jail.
Well, I think we can accommodate you now.
And this
Move
is
you in
really
here.
what it was like.
Yes.
So this is not exactly what I would call comfortable.
No, it wasn't designed to be comfortable.
Pretty small.
Heavy bars out front, right. Usually one or two beds in there, and a toilet, and maybe a sink for some water, and that was it.
And this is where you stayed.
That's correct.
I think that's a good deterrent. That would keep me out of there. It's worked so far. Now, as we continue down this way, this is
Yes.
even older. This is back to when we were a territory.
Yes. This actually shows the conditions in the late 1800s. And the individual here, the mannequin, is representative of Henry Garfious, who was our first Phoenix Marshal, and that's when the city became incorporated in 1881, and he was a marshal up through 1886. And this kind of gives you an overview of how the building would have been designed during that time period.
And we're really talking pretty tiny accommodations.
Oh yes, very small.
Now, Mike, this is a room that's designed especially for kids. Let's come back to that in a minute, but first tell me about these uniforms that are up here.
Yes, the uniform on the left, the dark blue, is the Eisenhower jacket. That was a winter wear uniform, and then the one to the right is the summer uniform. And those would have been worn by police officers in the 50s and 60s.
Now, this room, again, designed for kids.
Oh yes, it is. We have uniform shirts, which like the one that you're holding in your hand. This is the things that we allow the young people to try on. And then we also have the vests that they can put underneath there, and it gives them an idea of what the officer wears, the weight.
And these are pretty heavy.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So they can put this whole thing on and get a feel for what it's really like to do this job.
Yes. And from there they can go out into the other part of the museum and sit in the police car and really feel the same as a police officer would on the street, and then maybe understand a little bit more about what he does and how he feels carrying all this weight around with him.
Is it important to you that kids understand that kind of thing?
Yes, I think it is, because it brings more of a personal touch to it, helps them understand more that the police officer is human and that he experiences the same kinds of concerns as they do, and this weight and everything that he carries around with him, he does for a purpose, and he does it for not only his protection but also representing authority, and then they understand his role better.
And talking about the lives of police officers, we've got a room next door that
Yes.
deals exactly with that. Should we go
Yes,
take a
we
look
do.
at that?
And Janine, this is our memorial room of all the officers with the Phoenix Police Department that have lost their life in the line of duty. And there's a photograph of each officer and also a description on what caused his death as a result of the
And how many
incident.
officers have we lost since 1925?
We've lost 25 officers on the police department.
And over here?
These are the different awards that the police department give out to each officer, whether he's been killed in the line of duty or he did a brave act, something along that line.
So sometimes a family will get one of these.
Correct. And then we also have the photographs and information on each one of our dogs that we've lost in the line of duty. There were a total of 3.
And I understand that some police officers are alive because those dogs actually took a bullet for them, essentially.
Exactly. There's one incident that did occur in, and the other is accidents. You know, the dog got out in the street and it could have been an officer that would have been hit.
killed.
Yes.
This is a gorgeous piece of artwork. Tell me about this.
Well, this is a memorial that was completed by Todd White, who's a police officer on the police department. And it shows the uniform that we wear today, and it's representative of our Phoenix police officers.
And there's a lot of detail in the bronze that's going to be a little hard to see on camera, but when you're here you can actually see the patches and the soles of the shoes.
Oh yeah, yeah. The interesting thing about this memorial is that we contacted all the families of fallen officers, and we received some of their brass and copper, and we used that to melt down within the memorial itself.
So a very special way of remembering people who have given everything, given their lives, so that the rest of us can be safe. Mike, this has been terrific. What a great museum.
Well, thank you very much. It's
Thanks
been
so
a
much for
pleasure.
having us.
Oh yeah.
Let's let people know what time they can come down here and actually, because there's a whole lot more than we got to show
Oh
today.
yeah. We open up at 9 a.m. and we close at 3 p.m. but we only open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Okay. And the address?
It's 101 South Central. It's right on the corner of Central and Jefferson.
Great. And if people want to call for more information, what number should they call?
Okay, the area code 602. It's 534-PAST, P-A-S-T, or 7278.
All right, great. Thanks so
Sure,
much for
my
having
pleasure.
us. It was really fun. This was terrific, wasn't it? The visit at the Phoenix Police Museum in downtown Phoenix. There is another museum in town you also probably have never heard of. It's a firefighting museum called the Hall of Flame. Let's go take a look at that one. This is it. This is the Hall of Flame. It's located out here on East Van Buren near Phoenix Municipal Stadium and basically right across the street from the Phoenix Zoo. Now what you're going to find in here is antique fire apparatus. Some of it dates clear back to 1725. This is pretty neat stuff. Come on in with me. Let's take a look. And this is it, the Hall of Flame. And with me is Dr. Peter Malloy, who is the Executive Director of the Hall of Flame. Yes. Thanks so much for having us here.
No, it's my pleasure.
Tell me about this first piece that we're looking at. This is kind of a pride and joy.
Yeah, it's the oldest piece in the collection. It was built in 1725. It was used in probably in northern England. And Newsham was a good marketer as well as a fire engine builder. He sold these to every American colonial town. So an engine like this was used in Boston and Philadelphia, Colonial Williamsburg, Charlestown as well.
And this actually pumped water?
Yeah, it could pump about 50 gallons of water a minute, which is the equivalent of about three garden hoses. And it took about anywhere from 15 to 20 men to pump it. By hand.
Well, as we go around the corner here, tell me a little bit about the Hall of Flame. How did it start?
Well, it started with the donation, or actually the present of a fire engine to our founder, a man named George F. Getz, Jr. He lived up in Illinois, and his wife gave him a fire engine as a Christmas present. And he got very interested in it, and he wanted to establish a museum, and investigated and found that nobody was really collecting fire apparatus in the 50s. So he started collecting, and in 1961 he organized the Hall of Flame, again up in the Midwest. But the family moved down here about 1970, and when he did, he moved the Hall of Flame down here.
So they basically brought their museum with them.
Right, and opened up in this building in 1974.
Now, as we go down this aisle here, let's start with this one. We're going to talk a little bit more with Don Hale later, who did the restoration on this, but what are we looking at here? Well,
this is a hand pump fire engine. Originally this was pulled by hand. After they retired it after the Civil War, they rigged it up to be pulled by horses because they took it all over New England to compete with other pumpers in competitions. But it was pulled by hand, as almost all American fire engines were. And it's about the largest hand pumper that was designed. It took 50 men to pump it, and it could pump about 250 gallons of water a minute.
And so this was a pretty common piece of fire apparatus in its day?
Yes, in the large cities, New York and Philadelphia especially. It would have been unusual in New England. New England had their own style of pumper. They were pretty parochial. They didn't like to copy the Philadelphia style. But this is one of the few Philadelphia style pumpers used there. It was built in 1844.
What kind of condition are most of these in when you get them?
They're anywhere from severely derelict to halfway decent. We've got, especially the hand and horse-drawn equipment, has usually been pretty well neglected.
It's usually been sitting out on somebody's farm, laying around?
Been exposed to the weather, and the original paint is gone, and sometimes the metal ornaments are missing as well.
Now tell me about this one. I'm a layperson, but it looks like a ladder truck to me.
Yeah, it's a ladder wagon. It would be called a village ladder wagon. It was built about 1880 in Wisconsin, and it was used by a town in Wisconsin until about 1920. And they retired it and eventually donated it to the museum around 1960. And this is usually the first piece of apparatus that a town got, was a ladder wagon, so that they could make rescues, get buckets of water in the burning, in the windows, things of that nature.
Now you mentioned the buckets, and that's one of the things that caught my attention. They look like they're made of leather.
They are made of leather. They use leather fire buckets because they held up longer than wooden buckets. A wooden bucket would deteriorate, and then of course when they needed it to fire, it wouldn't be any good. So leather held up longer, it was more durable, and it was the standard bucket from the 17th century down till about 1880, when they started making rubber buckets. It looked just like the leather buckets, but they were made out of rubber.
And the ladders, these are the original ladders on this truck?
Not on this one, no. They're similar to ladders that would have been on it. Actually, this ladder is a little bit larger than the original ladder on it.
Okay.
But it's very similar in construction.
Now, as we glance over here to our left, this is another pretty ornate
Yes.
decorated wagon.
Yeah, the American apparatus is almost always very highly decorated. The volunteer companies like to compete with each other. So originally they would get a piece and they would hire an artist to paint and decorate it. By the 1830s and 40s, the fire engine manufacturers themselves had large staffs to decorate them because they knew that's what their clientele wanted.
And that's a tradition that continues, isn't it?
It still does,
engines.
yeah. Fire apparatus makers today still will spend several $1,000s decorating a rig before it's delivered.
Now this is another pumper wagon, is that right?
Yeah, it was built about 1880. It was used in a little town in Maine, and it was built in New York State. And it has the hose reel on it, which is kind of a nice addition, so they can get it in action right away. It could pump about 40 gallons of water a minute.
And then another one over here. This nice green one. Is this another pumper?
This is another Newsham. It's about the same period as our 1725 Newsham. It could date anywhere from 1725 to the 1790s. It's called an estate pumper because in England each estate had its own fire department. And this is small enough so that it can actually be carried right into the fire. They didn't have hose that worked at that time. That's why you have the little spout on it. So the closer they could get this engine to the fire, the better.
So you just basically wheel it right up to the house, or as close as you could get?
And then just lift it right off the chassis and carry it right in.
And how much water again would this hold?
This would pump about 30 gallons a minute, between 25 and 30. Depends on how much of a supply of water you can dump in with your buckets, because that's the main supply.
Now, as I look over here, I'm seeing a lot of plaques on the wall. You want to come over here and tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Now, the plaque that we're looking at now looks an awful lot to me like the logo for the city of Phoenix, but I gather there's a little more to it than that.
Yeah, it's several decades before the Phoenix logo, although the idea is the same with the bird rising from the ashes. The Phoenix was an English insurance company that was organized about 1800, and they took that as their logo.
And that's what these are, correct? These are fire marks, insurance marks.
Yeah, when the English pioneered fire insurance right after the Great Fire of London, and when they did, the insurance companies agreed to take on the role of the fire service in England. And the insurance companies came up with marks, which are really just proofs of insurance that you would put on your house with your policy number. As this one is made out of lead, and the number is stamped into it. So
the insurance companies actually fought the fires?
Yeah, they did. The problem was, of course, if your house wasn't insured by one of these companies, or if it didn't have insured by another company that had a mutual aid agreement with your company, that the chances are they would not try to extinguish the fire in your house.
So if I had a house and I did not have one of these marks on it, chances are they just let me burn.
Yeah, that would have been the case until about the 1750s and 60s, and then they had so many disasters that they pretty well forced the insurance companies to respond anyway. But in England, they didn't really have municipal fire departments until the 1860s. They hung on with using the insurance companies, and insurance companies had no real incentive to have large fire departments. So they had a lot of serious fires that got out of control in England.
Did we ever see these in the United States?
Yes, the United States had fire marks as well, but they weren't as strictly enforced as in England. However, the volunteer firefighters knew that if your house had a mark and mine didn't, and they were both on fire, that the insurance company would give a premium to them for attacking a fire that was insured by them.
So if you've got the mark, they're going to go to you first?
You first. That's not to say they wouldn't try to do the second house as well, but if you had an insurance fire mark, you're going to get better service. There's also a way that people used to discourage arson, because arson was a big problem. And if you had an insurance fire mark, there's not much point in burning the person's house down because he's going to be reimbursed anyway.
Now, I see something over down that way that looks an awful lot like Cinderella's carriage to me.
Yes,
Can we go take a look at that?
Sure.
All right. Now, the little girl in me got a glance of that from across the room and fell in love with it right away. What are we looking at here?
Well, the firemen call these parade carriages. And originally, what they really are hose carriages that have been highly stylized so that they're really of no use except to be pulled in parades. They covered over the drum where the hose would have been on.
And that's in the center part here.
And they're much more elaborately decorated than any hose carriages were as well. And from about the 1870s onward into the early 20th century, they bought these carriages from fire apparatus builders. And their sole purpose was to pull them in parades, to visit other towns and impress them with the quality of their parade carriage.
So you'd never see anything quite this fancy fighting a fire?
No, they would. Technically, they could take off the cover and put hose on it, but it would be ruined taking it to the fire, so they didn't do that.
Well, there's awful lot of ornate work on here in the lamps and in a lot of the decoration.
Yes, the sides are made out of sterling silver, and they've been engraved quite nicely. And the paint, lanterns, bells, decorations are all very carefully done. These things cost actually as much as a steam fire engine, and this one was built in 1889. It's about the same as a steam fire engine at the same period.
So they really enjoyed their parades.
Yeah, but firefighters do that today. They'll save an old truck and spend thousands of dollars restoring it and run them in parade. They don't use them at fire, so it's the same idea.
Now, what's this over here? This is a pretty good-sized steam engine, is what it looks like to me.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and it's really a critical innovation in the history of firefighting. From about the 1850s onwards, American manufacturers, also English, German, and French manufacturers applied steam technology to firefighting. You have a boiler that it's a very specially designed boiler that can get up steam very rapidly, and it's connected to a steam engine, which is what the two cylinders are on the top. The steam from the boiler runs those engines, and in turn the engines drive a flywheel and a crankshaft and operate a pump, a very large pump down on the bottom. It can pump 750 gallons of water a minute, which is about the capacity of a modern European fire engine. It's about half the capacity of a modern American fire engine, typical.
Is the water supply on board here, or were they pumping from someplace else?
The water has to be drafted through a suction hose. Hoses like this would be drafted either from a hydrant or from another water source, a pond, or in many cases, cities would build a cistern every quarter of a mile in the town that would hold 15 to 20,000 gallons of water, and they would draft from the cistern. They'd use a filter here to prevent rocks from getting into the pump.
This is a big, heavy piece of equipment, it looks like.
It is. It weighs close to 9,000 pounds. This one was built actually in 1904, and it was used in Reno, Nevada for about 20 years. It was built in Cincinnati. And it's about the latest evolution of the steam fire engine. After this model, they went to motorized apparatus.
All right. Now, what we see up here is a plush Dalmatian. But tell me about the significance of that dog in firefighting. We see that all the time.
Yeah, it's the Dalmatian. They were used to accompany fire engines or as mascots for fire companies, and in England they were used as coach dogs by owners of estates to accompany their carriages and coaches on trips, because they tended to calm the horses down, and they were also good security. If you parked your carriage at an inn when you went in to eat, you wouldn't have to worry about somebody coming by and stealing your carriage because of the Dalmatians. In the United States, they came to be associated as fire department dogs, but we've done some research, and fire departments really used just about anything that wandered by the fire station. And Phoenix, their first mascot was a goat, and he was followed by a coyote, and when he ran away, they got a Boston Terrier. So I don't know if they ever had a Dalmatian.
But apparently they found something.
They always had something, yes.
All right. Now we have another steam engine over here.
Yes, this is an English steam engine. The English had their own design for steam fire engines. There was an excellent design because it's completely self-contained. The whole engine company could sit on this bin and ride to the fire. You have a small boiler and a 400-gallon per minute pump that matched up well to the water supply of the 1890s when this was built. And they have a coal supply down here in the bottom so that you can get the thing going right away. And really, this is a completely self-contained unit. The American engine company, you needed an additional wagon to accompany the steam engine to carry coal and hose and firefighters. This rig also carried hose inside the bin. So it's a very nicely designed piece, and all English fire engines tended to be this size. European apparatus is much smaller on average than American apparatus.
So the next step in the evolution then would be motorized engines.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
they were desperate to motorize. The horses were an enormous expense. The American fire service only went to horses very late when their apparatus got so heavy that they had no other choice. And also the professional fire departments had a small number of people on them, so they needed horses. But they were very difficult to train and very expensive to keep in operation. And they had the problem what to do with retired horses. They didn't want to sell them to a glue company.
Sure,
but,
sure.
So they had a problem there.
We got some good motorized examples in the next room. Shall we go take a look?
Okay.
All right. Now, as motorized fire trucks go, this one's pretty old.
Yes, it is. It's the oldest one we have in our collection. It was built in 1913 in London by the Merryweather Fire Apparatus Company. and sold used in 1920 to the International Fire Company in Lima, Peru.
Now, I feel silly even having to ask this, but this is basically a starter, huh?
Yeah, that's the starter. This was built several years before the starter motor was invented, and that's the only way they could start it is by advancing the timing and cranking it, just like an aircraft engine, moving the propeller, same idea.
Crank it to get going to the fire. Now, you said this one was in Lima, Peru. What condition was it in when it first came to you?
Well, we got it. A collector imported it into the United States from Lima, and he just let it sit out in the desert for several years, and it was severely deteriorated. Our restorer spent close to 8 months getting it back in shape.
And it's pretty impressive to look at now. It looks a lot like some of the fire carriages that we were looking at in the other room.
Yeah, it's patterned after the Shan Mason style steamer that the English used. The idea is, again, for the firefighters to sit on the hose bin here and ride to the fire that way. It wasn't a successful design with motorized apparatus because they would go faster and the firefighters would tend to fall off the rig going around corners.
And probably not what you want to have happen.
No.
Now, the ladder that's on here now, is that original?
Yeah, that came with the rig. The English like to put their ladders up on top, and it's a ground ladder. Much as an American fire engine, a pumper has a single ladder like that. It's actually a little bit easier to get to than the way they mounted most American ladders.
And then back behind here, this is the same kind of steam engine that we saw
No,
before?
this is a pump that was designed to be run from an internal combustion engine. The English came up with this design about 1910, and it was in production for about 40 years. It's a piston pump, and it pumps about, again, as with the steamer, about 400 gallons a minute.
And as we look at this, I really want to remind people that we're just barely scratching the surface here. There is so much to see at this museum. We're just getting a taste.
And we have almost 90 pieces on exhibit, so there's a lot to be said for each one.
And a lot to come down here and see. Now here we're looking at a photograph of a horse-drawn apparatus, but as we look up, this was later motorized.
Yes, it's called a water tower, and they were uniquely American. There are about 140, I suppose, built in the entire history of the American Fire Service for use all over the country. This one was built for Toledo, Ohio in 1897. It was pulled by horses. It was an expensive piece of equipment, so when they motorized, they didn't want to just throw it away and buy one from scratch. So they moved the rear tires that were originally on it to what was going to become the rear of the water tower, and then put a tractor on the other end.
So this part of it was drawn by horses. It was
this
drawn
was
from
originally
this
the front end, yeah. You can see the seats where the driver sat to get it to the fire. But after 1915, that became the rear.
Now this is literally a water tower that comes up, right?
Yes, you could think of it almost as a self-propelled fireboat. The idea was to get a lot of water to multi-story buildings, the fourth, fifth, or sixth story. And the firemen would simply crank the thing up by hand, which is a very, very onerous thing to do.
Looks it.
And they would hook it up to the output from 3 or 4 steam fire engines. It could handle as much as 3,000 gallons of water a minute, that's about what a fireboat puts out. And the problem was, with that much water, they tended to flip over because of Newton's third law. And they also had to be pretty close to a building, so buildings collapsed on them fairly often. So not that many have survived. In fact, this is the only tower of this maker to survive.
So it was a kind of a good idea.
Yeah, well, it worked out. It was a good idea in theory. In practice, it didn't work out because they didn't have hydraulics, and they really didn't have the motorized equipment to make it work, as say today a modern tower ladder would work.
But these cannon, you were telling me, actually worked really well.
Yeah, they did. And again, if you look at a fireboat, they have deluge guns like this. And because they could be precisely controlled and they put out a tremendous amount of water, they would have been very useful at a fire. They only dragged this thing out for third alarms and up.
So you had a pretty big fire before you'd ever use this.
Yeah, it takes a pretty good amount of time to get it to the fire.
Now the seat that's up there has some interesting engineering issues.
Yeah, it's really a complete refusal to take human engineering into consideration designing this. It serves also as the gas tank. The driver sits directly on top of the gas tank. It holds about 4 gallons of gas. And although modern trucks, the driver is often very close to the gas tank, in this particular one, it's impossible to ignore the fact that you're sitting on 4 gallons of gas on your way to a fire.
You even had to take the cushions out to refuel it.
That's right. Yeah, the tractor was designed by a man named Walter Christie, who's a very famous race car driver, and designed the suspension for the modern tank. And it was one of his only successful ventures. He built about 900 of these tractors. They have a transversely mounted engine, just like on a modern Japanese car. And it's a beautiful piece of apparatus. The tractor worked very nicely on these.
Now there's a name I recognize, Phoenix Fire Department. This was actually one of their engines.
Yes, it was. It was the fourth piece of motorized apparatus that Phoenix ever owned. Built in 1920 and by Seagrave, which was a big maker of fire apparatus, and stationed in downtown Phoenix. And it was in service until after World War II.
A long time. Now, some of the things that we see here is the steering wheel, and some of the stuff was just not even on the truck when you found it, right?
Yeah, we found it in a completely derelict condition not too far from Taos, New Mexico. It was out in the desert. And our founder, George Getz, found it, and some of the plumbing had Phoenix Fire Department stamped on it. So we did some research and found that it was actually a Phoenix rig, so we towed it back here, and Don spent several months restoring it and getting it back in action, but all the equipment was missing from it.
And you mentioned Don. That's Don Hale, who does most of the restoration work here.
Yeah, Don does all our restoration.
All of the restoration work. How, in a case like this, do you know what the artwork looked like?
Well, thanks to Harold Schell, who is a Phoenix Fire Department historian. We had some pictures of the rig when it was in service in Phoenix in the 20s, and we also found the original delivery photo that the Seagrave Fire Apparatus Company had taken of the rig, so we were able to use that as well. So we had pretty good records, much better than usual to get this as accurate as possible.
Well, and since we've mentioned Don, we're going to take a minute and go meet him and learn a little bit more about how he does his work. Hi, Don. Everybody, this is Don Hale. He does the restoration of these kinds of apparatus, this kind of vehicle around here. Tell me a little bit about this one that you're working on now, and especially about this wheel that you've been working on.
This is a 1907 Seagraves hose wagon, and there's not many left.
Where did you find this one, or where was this one found?
I didn't find it. The company did, and it came from back east, I think someplace around Philadelphia. I'm not too sure. So.
Yeah. What kind of shape was it in when it came
Bad.
to you? Bad.
Bad.
What did it look like? Was this, you mentioned that some of it was cracked?
Yeah, it was cracked, and I had to redo lots of it. This is cracked out, and what I do, clean it all out, and then re-glue it, put this back on. It was all broke off. Had to make part of this and put it back to match the other side.
And then you mentioned that this is a steel fender.
Yeah, this is a steel fender, and it's spring steel.
Spring steel.
Yeah, spring steel.
Now, did that have to be redone too, or was that still
Well,
in
you
pretty
can't
good shape?
straighten it with the hammer.
Is that right?
Nope, you have to use a heat, take the temper out, and then put the temper back.
And tell me about the wheel now. This you had to, did you have to
this-
rebuild this?
Yes, this I just got through doing. And I had to replace, on this one here, 5 spokes. I had to pull the tire off and split it. You can see where I split it here and on the other side.
And then rebuild the spokes and put it all back
Yeah,
together.
put it all back together again, and these been replaced, all the rivets.
Now, how do you know what it's supposed to look like?
I have photos of them, original copies.
Of what the Seagraves
Yeah,
engine would have looked like?
We have a good library up there, and we have on the research back to where it came from, and we go from there. Like if small towns, you get a hold of museums, and the old timers has photos.
And then you just match them up?
Yeah, and I get the photos. I have some up there.
Well, can we look some more down at the other end of this wagon?
I just set this right
Balance that
there.
wheel? Yeah.
Just don't get around it. But,
All right,
it's
because
heavy.
that's heavy. Now, in something like this, was this lantern still here, or did you have to go find one?
No, I had these when I worked for George in between, and I saved a lot of stuff at home in San Luis Obispo. I had my own rigs.
So you just happened to have one that fit, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These are made. That's a copy.
That's something you made.
Yeah, I made that.
Now, you do an awful lot of detail work, too. This painting
Oh,
is
yeah, I
yours,
do all
isn't
the
it?
gold leaf and artwork. Yeah.
How long does that take to do something like that?
It's kind of hard.
You just keep
Kind of
working
hard to
at it.
say. You know, I never know how long I'm going to be here. Somebody called me to do something up in front. I just drop it and help them out there.
Uh-huh. How long would you figure, though, given that this one was in bad shape, as you said, when you got it?
It took me about, I've got about 2 months, 3 months on this one already.
3 months.
I shouldn't have had. Just had to replace a lot of wood, just stuff like this.
Uh-huh. And you said and this one's about 100 years old, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Now, Don, tell me what this thing is right here. What is that?
It's a foot bell.
Uh-huh.
Like going to the fires, one of the firemen up there puts his foot on it and works the bell below. And this is the part that makes it work.
Uh-huh.
And it spins around and goes, it's got a big
casing of it.
Yeah, big brass case. And I don't have it finished yet, so.
But there'd be 2 guys riding up here?
Yeah, 2.
One of them be pushing the bell, and it's the same as a siren.
And one will be driving.
Well, thank you so much for showing all of this to us. It's beautiful work. We're going to go back into the main exhibit area now and rejoin Dr. Malloy. Now, what's behind us here may not look all that high-tech, but this was a pretty complex piece of equipment, it sounds like.
Yes, it was. It was very involved and very efficient, very reliable, designed by an American inventor. First one was used in Boston in the 1850s. By about the 1890s, they had all the quirks worked out of it. This one was used in Glendale, California, dates from the 1920s.
And this is actually a fire alarm system.
It's a fire alarm telegraph system. There's several of them still in operation in major cities around the United States. But they were pretty much replaced as the first line system by CAD computerized systems based on the telephone during the 1970s and 80s.
Now you're going to actually show us how this works.
Yeah, it's a very simple setup. It starts with the firebox. Hundreds of them would be at various street corners around town.
And this one's actually from Prescott, Arizona.
From Prescott, from downtown Prescott, and this is box 13. So there's no other box 13s in Prescott, just that one. So if box 13 goes into alarm, then the man in the central station would know that there was a fire in that vicinity.
Okay.
That's the whole point of the thing. So when you pull the box, it would set off a gong here in the central station, and also a tape indicator that would punch out the box's number. We've operated this before. You can see it's box 13.
Okay.
And the gong will ring 13. It does it 4 times because they wanted to make sure that they had a valid box and alarm in the central station. So it's a little bit aggravating to listen to it go through 4 times, but that's the way they set it up.
That's the way they worked. Well, shall we try it?
Sure.
All right. Now, you want me to go ahead and
pull pull the box.
Firebox here. Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me turn this thing on here. Okay.
Okay. It says for fire, pull lever. So I'm pulling the lever. Now explain to me again what just happened here. We just sent an alarm citywide, basically.
Yeah, basically that's what, well, actually it came into the central station, and the man in the central station, the operator, would determine, well, we have a valid alarm. So the next part is he would put that box 13 on his sender, and he would then send that alarm out to every firehouse in the city, which is represented over here by a small indicator and a gong. So in that firehouse, there would be a fireman on watch, called house watch, and he would, when he heard box 13, he would have a group of index cards, one for each box, and he would know what they were supposed to do on box 13, whether they went on the first alarm, second, third alarm, or covered somebody else's quarters or whatever.
So these punch tapes that we see here actually punched once, paused, and then 3 times. That's how they would know it's box 13.
Yeah, that's why we're very happy to have box 13. We used to have box 1281.
So 13 works well.
Yeah, 13's a lot better.
And then they in the firehouse would see the same thing over here.
Yeah, I can press the sender here and it should sound the alarm. In this case, just once, though.
Now that's kind of the way things used to be done. This is much more similar to what we use now.
Yes, this system was designed in Phoenix by a couple of Phoenix firefighters, together with a couple of Bell telephone engineers. They put the system in. It was operating by about 1957.
And this is the actual dispatch equipment that was used?
Yes, the Phoenix Fire Department donated this to the museum when they replaced it in 1979.
And the sounds that we're hearing now, this is not a tape recording. We're actually listening to the fire department.
Yeah, we hooked up a scanner just so people get an idea of messages coming on down to fire stations.
Around the city. Now, tell me a little bit about the innovations. What was so unusual about what Phoenix did?
Well, what it does is it takes advantage of the telephone. It's built around a telephone switchboard, and the operator would handle all incoming calls, but the operator could also handle calls coming in from the boxes that were pulled. This section here represents the Gamewell boxes that were still in place.
Just like we just saw.
Yeah, except that about 75–80% of calls were coming in over the telephone, so this was a much better system.
And this was pretty new at the time. This was state-of-the-art.
It was state-of-the-art. And the other thing that this setup did, it was in this dispatch board where the Phoenix firefighters figured out a way so that when the street intersection was punched into the system, and they had computer punch cards for each street intersection, only those companies that were supposed to respond would be illuminated. And they could add companies or delete companies as they wanted. They'd press a tone button, which would send a signal to each station that was supposed to respond, and then they would come over the radio and announce the alarm. So it's just head and shoulders over the Gamewell system. It's much more flexible.
And this has kind of set the tone for Phoenix. The Phoenix Fire Department has been a leader in this industry ever since this time.
Yeah, you could say that. In the beginning, in the 50s, with this setup, we had a chief dean, a very progressive chief. Phoenix began to get a national reputation, not only for its alarm room, but for its community safety programs and for the quality of its other operations.
And you mentioned that Phoenix firefighters, as well as the union, have been involved here at the museum.
Yes, they are. Well, here's a good example. The Phoenix Fire Department donated this alarm room. They also, a couple of years ago, they donated the system that replaced this, and which has been replaced a couple of years ago by a much more modern computerized system. And they also help us in the design of our fire safety exhibits, and they've given the firefighters have made significant monetary contributions to us as well.
So a good partnership.
The union. Excellent.
And one of the realities of firefighting is it's very dangerous work, and people lose their lives.
Yes, and that's why we established this gallery in 1998. It was opened by Senator McCain. And we recognize firefighters who died in the line of duty, as well as firefighters who've been decorated for bravery.
And these are firefighters from all over the United States.
All over the United States, yes.
And as we walk over here, these are the folks who touched our lives most directly. These are people from the greater Phoenix area killed in the line of duty.
Yes, we have a special exhibit area to honor those people who died from 1929 to the present. And we're lucky that there are relatively few firefighters from this area who have died, but still more than one is too many.
Now, what we're seeing here is a pretty extensive collection of fire helmets.
Yeah, this represents about 20% of our helmet collection. It's the most interesting ones in our opinion. In this area, we have helmets from all over Europe, Mexico, Japan, and down at the other end of the case, we have some helmets from the United States.
Now, a lot of countries chose military design for their helmets. The United States did something a little different.
Yes, the United States firefighters developed their own unique helmet during the 1830s that has been used down to the present day, really. Made out of leather, sheds water, and sheds falling debris. It's really designed as a very efficient way to protect the firefighter at a fire.
And as you mentioned, basically the same design still in use now.
Yes, there are a number of American firefighters today who will spend the extra several $100s to buy a leather helmet. The most common helmet used today now are the plastic MSA-style helmets, which still in style look like the old leather helmets.
All right. Well, I want to remind people that we have, again, just barely scratched the surface of what's here at the Hall of Flame. There's an awful lot more to see. You need to come on down. I thank you, Dr. Peter Malloy, for being with us today and showing us around.
I appreciate your coming by, Janine.
Well, thank you again. Now, grab a pencil. Here is the address for the Hall of Flame Museum of Firefighting. You're going to want to go to 6101 East Van Buren. That is just east of Phoenix Municipal Stadium. You can call 602-ASK-FIRE. And that translates to 602-275-3473 to get more information. Once again, we want to thank Mike Nicolin of the Phoenix Police Museum for being with us today, and thanks too to Dr. Peter Malloy from the Hall of Flame here for joining us. I'm Janine LeCure for Phoenix 11. We'll see you next time on City Scene.